can you tell me a bit about your roots? How was Shilo when she was a kid?
All right. So I can start with an introduction. My name is Shilo Shiv Suleman, and I'm the founder of an organization called the Fearless Collective. And it's interesting to be in a moment of tremendous fear and actually speaking about what it means to be fearless, right? Because over the last couple of years with the pandemic, we've all been so afraid of everything from touch, of contact, of community, and we're just starting to re-emerge from that fear. And also we're here at COP talking about fear of the climate and the climate crisis. And there's a lot of fear that's very real. And yet I think while it's important to keep talking about the fear, it's also equally important to reaffirm love and reaffirm the connection that needs to exist underneath all of that. So for me in my own life, I guess my own artistic practice began at a moment of tremendous fear in my own personal history when I was quite young, and one night my father vanished and my mother basically found herself as a single mother responsible for 2 children. And she began to paint, and I often say that beauty saved me because beauty became both in the emotional backbone as well as the financial backbone for our family. And what's beautiful about art and any kind of creative expression is that what begins, I think, as catharsis eventually becomes into alchemy, like it becomes into magic, So in the beginning, while we were experiencing this fear, we were painting our way through a lot of that fear. Eventually, when you let it out enough, there's no choice except to transform. And that's what happened with me and my mother both. Her name is Shilo Suleman. She's a tremendously beautiful artist, and she only began painting in her late 30s. So for me, this practice of making the invisible visible, taking pain and transforming it into beauty, it comes from a deeply personal space.
I like how you say that you make the invisible visible. I think that's very connected with feminism as well, and I know you're very connected to that you've been creating spaces for women to be empowered, to talk about rape culture and these kind of things. How does that intersect with environmental issues for you? And
Yeah, I think what perhaps a byproduct of colonization is that we started to look at everything in separation. And in a lot of indigenous cultures, in a lot of even traditional cultures, things were not separate. Even masculine and feminine exist in our own bodies. I have masculine aspects to myself, feminine aspects to myself, and also there's a whole spectrum in between that chooses no binaries. And so I think what with this whole kind of divide and conquer mentality, what tends to happen is that we start to see ourselves as separate from each other, from other cultures. We start to see ourselves as separate from the environment, from the earth, from the sky, from the water. But we have all of these elements inside of us. And so I think on a more even spiritual level, aside from the more political and environmental intersections of gender and environment, I think on a spiritual level, I think recognizing our place in the universe is super important. And so for me, that's where my kind of intersectional thinking begins, is that there is no separation actually. And the more that we begin to find spaces of union, the closer we are in relationship with the planet, but also with each other. And for me, that is very feminine and also very feminist, because I think the earth definitely has a feminine quality to her. And across cultures, the earth is always referred to as a woman, or as the feminine, the divine feminine. So for me, I think that intersection is crucial, because like in India, for example, all the rivers that we have, they're always women. They always have beautiful stories of goddesses associated with them. And sadly, the state of the rivers also does reflect the state of women in our country currently. So I think the earth is also reflective of what's happening with our cultures. Yeah.
Yeah, that's curious, because I think sometimes we experience this narrative that we're living a climate emergency, and that it seems that we have to react instead of act and transform from inside to the outside. How does that feel for you to be here in Glasgow painting this, that takes you some days, knowing that every day there is people gathering inside the building for some negotiations that are kind of very express and are trying to be like hold it in a week, what would be your reflection or the contrast of inside and outside here?
Yeah, so we're here in Glasgow during one of the most critical moments in our history after a global emergency. 2 years, I think we've forgotten because suddenly things are open again, but the impact of these 2 years is very tremendous on all of us and very reflective of things that may come. And while I think it's amazing that we have this opportunity and space inside of conference halls with delegates, world leaders, to gather together and make negotiations and decisions simultaneously, I think there's such a disconnection, like I said, with the earth itself, that those decisions are going to be made from a very clinical space and not from a space of reverence and a space of connection, of union, of authenticity. Simultaneously, there are indigenous leaders who have also been brought here by different grassroots organizations, including some of our collaborators here. And their nations are not recognized. They still live within colonial structures. Their voices are not recognized. And the reverence, the ceremony, the ritual that actually connects them to the planet, be it creation stories or everyday rituals that of reverence towards the earth, those are completely diminished in these conversations. So I think, there's a way that fear makes us very reactive, but actually there needs to be a larger systemic and cultural and spiritual change, I believe. And I think indigenous leaders are here to teach us exactly that. So we have been painting over the last 3 days. We're here for another 3 more days. And we brought together a community of primarily women from Brazil, from Guyana, from Peru, and from North America in this very intimate workshop. And while on one hand, there are protests on the streets, on the other hand, there are negotiations inside of conference halls, we created a very sacred space of ceremony for these communities to gather together. And the question that we were asking, especially because it really feels like over the last year, it's been kind of apocalyptic. And so the question we were asking is, what is the world that we want to end? And so in this workshop, one by one, the women answered, I want the world of oppression to end. I want the world of pollution to end. I want the world of capitalism to end. I want the world of extraction to end. And we actually symbolically ended some of those aspects of the world that we no longer want to take forward. And in the second part of the workshop then, we asked the question, how does the world begin again? And each of the women who were part of our workshop answered these beautiful questions about how the world begins again with compassion, with empathy, with relationship, with connection, with community, with reverence, with a kind of rootedness and a kind of reimagination of how we can live with natural systems. And what's also quite beautiful about this process is very often indigenous communities or brown communities or Muslim communities are represented by someone else in the media, and these are women representing themselves, and so they choose how they want to be portrayed on the wall. We took a photograph and then we project that onto the wall and paint over 7 days. So that's what we're doing here in Glasgow.
That sounds amazing, and I am thinking also of how you were talking in your videos about imagination and fear, the connection between them, and then I imagine art for you and plays an awesome role for transformation and for collective transformation. How do you think overcoming fear can be related with social change?
I think the first thing that is taken away from communities who are marginalized is their imagination, right? You're told that this is who you can be, as opposed to you choosing who you want to be. And even say the East India Company, they had a 200-year plan in order to be able to colonize the entire world. And so for me, that is a radical act of imagination, and it's a horrible act of the imagination. But other imaginations have also existed, be it the Mayan calendar, or be it prophecies about the future, or be it stories or visions of what could be. A lot of those imaginations were taken away from us. A lot of those cultural practices were taken away from us. And so for me, a reclaiming of the imagination from fear is saying, instead of constantly being caught up in what could happen and what if the worst could happen, moving that creative vital force into reclaiming a prophecy of what we want rather than what we don't want. Yeah, I think it's a very crucial thing, especially for communities who've had their imaginations taken away from them.
Do you think communities and imagination are one of the solutions that are actually real outside there to start working towards a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. And I think imagination, say with this particular workshop, when we brought together all of these different women, we asked every person who was there to tell a creation story from their own culture. And those creation stories, even though they seem like they're fantastical and mythical, they're quite crucial because they really define how we place ourselves in relationship with the entire universe. So say the story of Adam and Eve, Eve is below Adam, and Adam goes on to name all of the animals and plants in his kingdom. Whereas in other creation stories, in other cultures, the creator is a woman, and the world is born inside her womb, or the earth existed before man and woman, and we came to learn from the plants and the animals. So where we place ourselves in those stories, where we place ourselves in our imagination is very vital to how we relate and how we extract from the earth. And so for me, I think imagination is quite crucial. I think the way that it's in more social justice circles, the way that we term it is narrative change, or and it is true, like the stories that we tell are vital in how we see ourselves and also how we see what our relationship with the planet can be.
And when would you say, or how would you say, you've been mentioning catharsis, and how was your personal process when you started to have more awareness on ecological awareness or feminist awareness as well?
I guess my own process is continuous because I am continuously transforming into who I want to be rather than who I'm told to be. Particularly as an Indian woman, there's a lot of pressure to behave, dress, act, treat our bodies, treat men in a certain way. And there's something quite seductive, but also very real about disobedience and about rebellion and about freedom, and having a freedom in imagination, because especially as Indian women, we're very often told, you can go here, you can't go here. You can dress like this, you can't dress like this. Your body is impure, your body is a site of shame very often. While simultaneously, so many images of goddesses and divine feminine exist inside temples, but women themselves on the street are treated with no reverence at all. And so I think in my own personal process, it's continuous. It is a continuous defiance, but not from a place of resistance, from a place of existence, like actually choosing who I want to be every single day. And be it here in Glasgow, choosing to be defiant, but existing in my most flamboyant and fearless form, or back home in India. Yeah.
And do you have any kind of practices, maybe it's art, that help you heal, or that you think can help heal a collective or even the planet?
For me, art is most definitely practice, but also, again, I think ceremony is really important, because in a lot of traditional cultures, ceremony was the way that we tied together the human subconscious with the natural consciousness, right? Folklore, I think, is so fascinating. We're in Scotland, which has a lot of crazy folk tales, but those crazy folk tales kind of tether our own imagination, our own creative force with the planet, like the thought that maybe, you could dig a hole into the ground and whisper secrets into it, and perhaps like all these beings made out of earth will emerge. Like all of these strange, beautiful stories of fantastical beasts, like they do mean something as a practice of tethering, of tethering our own consciousness back into the earth. So for me, I think ceremony is really important in how we act. And like I said, between protest and conference, there has to be a space of tethering, of ceremony, and of union. Aside from art, I guess beauty is a practice. Again, that's also connected up with ceremony. Be it through poetry, be it through kindness, be it through art itself. Yeah, so I think beauty is a practice.
Yeah, practicing beauty could be one of the things that people might be inspired to try to practice when they see, for example, this interview. How do you think changing these kind of things can help people to feel happier of the impact they're doing or the action they're taking communities.
I mean, again, I think, looking back at our cultures, tiny acts of reverence are so important. Like every morning in South India, women gather on the streets, and they take rice flour and they make these beautiful patterns called kollam in front of their homes, and every day it's a new pattern that they make. It's completely spontaneous. On one hand, there's a practical purpose, which is that they say that all the ants and the insects eat the rice, and so they don't enter your homes because they're already fed. But on the other hand, also, how beautiful is it to wake up in the morning and make an offering of beauty into the world? Or in the Hindu tradition, puja literally means an offering of beauty. It's and so 5 times a day you offer flowers, you offer water. So I think that kind of attention, right? Like it's like even when you're in love with someone, you like when they pay attention to you. Similarly, we need to pay attention to the stars, to the moon, to each other, to our interior universe. And I feel like there is a movement towards that, which I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about this intersection now of feminism, of environmentalism, of also social justice, spiritual justice. There are all of these things that are being woven back together, and I think that's where real transformation comes from.
Yeah, I can feel you're very excited about that, because you mentioned also, you mentioned beauty and pay attention, and I think that's what can reconnect humans with this separation and be the seed for transformation.
Absolutely, even if it's like paying attention to the sky or the moon, or the cycles of the earth, or like all of these systems that have fed us for millennia. I think that attention is the least we can do. Yeah, and I think the world needs our attention right now. So.